It was a bright and glamorous evening in New York City. The air was crisp, the skyline gleaming with lights, and the streets were full of people attending the annual charity gala that Jack Carter's company had been hosting for years. It was an event that drew the city's elite business moguls, politicians, and socialites all gathered in the same ballroom to flaunt their wealth and influence. But for Jack Carter, the event felt like just another obligation. At 34, Jack had everything most men could dream of: wealth, power, and an empire he had built from the ground up. CEO of Carter Enterprises, his name was synonymous with success. Yet, as he entered the grand hall, surrounded by guests showering him with praise and admiration, there was a hollow emptiness inside him that no amount of money could fill. Jack's eyes scanned the room, but his thoughts were elsewhere. He had spent so much of his life focused on building his business, chasing after deals and targets, that he had forgotten what it was like to truly feel alive. Emily Wright, the one person who had ever made him feel that way, was now a distant memory. He had let her slip through his fingers. It hadn't always been this way. There was a time when Jack had been more than just a workaholic. A time when he had found joy in the small things, like the way Emily would smile when they went on dates, or how she always managed to make him laugh after a long day of meetings. But slowly, work had crept into every part of his life, and Emily's laughter faded into the background. He remembered the last time they had fought. Months ago, when she told him that she couldn't keep waiting for him to choose her over his job. She had cried, and Jack had promised her things would change. But he hadn't followed through. He couldn't. The demands of his company were too great, and the pressure to succeed, to prove that he was worthy of the empire his father had handed down to him, was relentless. "Jack, you have to make a choice," Emily had told him, her voice filled with heartbreak. "I can't keep being second to your business. You have to decide if I'm worth it." But in the end, he had chosen the business. He thought he could make things right later, but later never came. As Jack stood at the edge of the ballroom, lost in his thoughts, he felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned to see a woman standing there, her dark hair cascading in waves, her deep blue eyes filled with warmth. It was Emily. She looked just as beautiful as he remembered, even more so with her simple black dress and confident, graceful presence. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Jack's heart skipped a beat, and for the first time in months, he felt something stir inside him. But then the reality set in. She wasn't his anymore. He had lost her. "Emily," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "I didn't expect to see you here." She smiled softly, but there was something distant in her eyes. "I'm here as a guest of a friend." "I didn't expect to see you either, Jack. It's been a while." Jack searched her face, trying to gauge what was going on in her mind. "How have you been?" Emily hesitated for a moment before replying. "I'm doing well. You know, just living life." The casualness in her tone struck Jack like a slap to the face. She had moved on, and he had no one to blame but himself. He could see that she was still the same strong, independent woman he had fallen in love with. But now there was an emotional distance between them that he couldn't bridge. "It's good to see you," Jack said, trying to sound casual, but the words felt hollow. Emily nodded. "Yeah, it's good to see you too." There was an awkward silence between them. Jack opened his mouth to speak, but before he could, Emily stepped back slightly. "I should probably get back to my friends. I'll see you around, Jack." "Wait," Jack called out, before she could walk away. "Emily, I never got a chance to properly apologize. I know I made mistakes. I was so focused on work that I didn't realize I was losing you." She turned back to face him, her expression softening for a moment. "You made your choice, Jack, and I made mine." Jack took a step closer, his heart pounding. "Emily, I know," she interrupted gently. "You don't need to say anything. You've already said enough. You made your choice, and I had to make mine. I moved on." Jack's chest tightened. He wanted to reach out to her, to tell her that he was sorry, that he was ready to change, but the words wouldn't come. She had already moved on, and he was the one left in the past, lost in the regret of the life he had chosen over her. As Emily walked away, Jack felt a crushing realization hit him. She was gone, and it was his fault. He had spent so many years chasing success, trying to prove himself in the eyes of his father and the world, that he had neglected the one person who truly mattered, the woman he had loved. The noise of the gala seemed to fade away as he stood there, frozen, watching Emily disappear into the crowd. He had everything: money, power, status, but it meant nothing without her. The weeks following Emily's sudden reappearance at the gala felt like a blur to Jack. Despite his success and the endless flow of work, there was a heavy weight pressing down on him. His mind kept replaying the moment they had shared her words, the way she walked away, the emotional distance in her eyes. He had told himself that he would move on from their past. That work was enough to fill the void, but deep down, Jack knew he was lying to himself. He couldn't shake the feeling that the life he had worked so hard for, the empire he had built, was now just a gilded cage. The late nights in his penthouse, the endless business meetings, the accolades from colleagues, they all felt hollow now. When Emily had walked out of his life, she hadn't just taken her love with her. She had taken his sense of purpose. Jack sat at his desk, surrounded by papers and reports, but none of it seemed to matter. He glanced at the framed photo on his desk, one from an old trip they had taken together. They looked so happy, carefree, laughing in front of the sunset. That person, the man in the photo, no longer existed. He sighed deeply and ran a hand through his hair, trying to shake off the memories, but it was no use. Every moment he spent in the office, every achievement he added to his resume, only made him more aware of what he had lost. As Jack sat in his office, deep in thought, his phone buzzed. It was a call from his mother, one he had been avoiding for weeks. "Jack, I've been trying to reach you." His mother's voice came through, the tone stern but not unkind. "You've been avoiding the family meetings. Your father is concerned." Jack clenched his jaw. "I'm busy, Mom. I don't have time for family business right now." "Don't be ridiculous," she snapped. "You think your father and I don't know what you're doing. You're throwing everything away, all the work we've done, all the sacrifices we've made for this family. And for what? A woman." Jack's chest tightened. "It's not just about her. I made my decision. I'm not going back." "Jack," his mother said, her voice softer now, "you've been a part of this legacy since the day you were born. You can't just throw it all away because of one person. We gave you everything, and now you're willing to give it all up for a fleeting love." "Love is not fleeting," Jack said quietly. "I love her, Mum, but I lost her because I didn't make her a priority, and now I'm paying the price." There was a long silence on the other end of the phone. "Do whatever you want," his mother finally said, her voice bitter, "but don't expect any support from us." Jack ended the call, his hand shaking. The reality of his situation hit him harder than ever. His family, his legacy, his father's expectations, none of it mattered if he wasn't truly happy. But was he willing to sacrifice everything to find that happiness? The next few days were filled with unease. Jack couldn't stop thinking about Emily, but he couldn't bring himself to contact her. He wasn't even sure if she would want to hear from him. After all, he had been the one to push her away, to choose his career over their love. He didn't deserve her. One afternoon, as Jack walked into a local cafe to grab a coffee, he froze. There, sitting by the window, was Emily. She hadn't noticed him yet. And for a moment, Jack stood there, watching her. She was reading a book, looking as calm and collected as ever. It was clear that she had moved on, and yet, seeing her again made the pain of their separation feel even sharper. Jack's heart raced. Should he approach her? Should he apologize? He didn't know what to say, but the need to speak with her, to somehow make amends, was overwhelming. Taking a deep breath, he walked over to her table. When Emily looked up and saw him, her face softened for a moment before she quickly masked her emotions. She closed her book and put it aside, her eyes meeting his with a look that was both familiar and distant. "Jack," Emily said, her voice calm but reserved. "What are you doing here?" "I was just passing by," Jack said, his voice a little shaky. "Can we talk?" Emily hesitated, then nodded slowly. Sure. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their past between them. Emily was the first to break the silence. "Jack, I don't know what you want from me," she said softly, her eyes avoiding his. "I don't know what I want either," Jack admitted, his voice raw with emotion. "I've been a fool, Emily. I put my work, my legacy, above everything, above us. And now I realize that it was the worst mistake I could have made." Emily looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mix of sadness and understanding. "I loved you, Jack. I really did. But you weren't there when I needed you, and I couldn't keep waiting for you to choose me. I deserve more than that." Jack's heart ached at her words. He had always known this, but hearing her say it out loud made it real. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I should have been there for you. I should have chosen you." Emily sighed, shaking her head. "But you didn't, and now I'm not sure we can go back. I've moved on, Jack. I've built my life without you. I've learned to live without waiting for someone who couldn't make me a priority." Jack swallowed hard, feeling the weight of her words. "I've made so many mistakes, and I don't want to lose you. But I understand if you don't want me anymore." There was a long pause, and Emily looked at him with a mixture of regret and acceptance. "I don't know if we can ever go back to what we were," Emily said quietly. "But I'm not angry anymore, Jack. I just can't be that person anymore. I can't wait for someone who isn't ready to fight for me." As Emily stood up to leave, Jack's heart shattered. He watched her walk out of the cafe, her figure disappearing into the distance. He wanted to chase after her, to tell her that he had changed, that he was ready to be the man she deserved. But the truth was, it was too late. Emily had moved on, and Jack was left with nothing but the remnants of the life he had chosen. His success, his wealth, his empire, all of it felt empty now. The only thing that had ever truly mattered to him was gone. Jack sat back in his seat, his head in his hands. The regret, the loss, it was suffocating. He had lost the one person who had ever made him feel whole, and now there was no turning back. The days following his meeting with Emily felt like an endless void for Jack. No matter how many meetings he had, how many projects he pushed forward, nothing seemed to fill the emptiness inside him. His mind kept returning to the last words Emily had said, "I've moved on. Jack, I can't wait for someone who isn't ready to fight for me." Every time he sat in his office, surrounded by his empire, the weight of that conversation crushed him. He had everything: wealth, influence, power, but none of it mattered without Emily. Jack spent hours walking through the empty halls of his penthouse, a place he once considered home. Now it felt like a gilded cage. His father's legacy, the countless deals he had closed, the awards he had won, none of it could replace the love he had once shared with Emily. The life he had worked so hard to build had now become a reminder of his own failures. He would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, thinking of how he had missed the one chance he had to make things right. His mind would replay all the moments he had ignored, the nights he stayed late at the office, the promises he never kept, the love he took for granted. But it was too late now. One evening, as Jack sat by the window of his office, watching the city below, his phone rang. It was his assistant. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice uncertain. "There's someone here to see you. Ms. Wright. Would you like me to send her away?" Jack's heart stopped. Emily, she was here. A rush of hope flooded his chest, but then reality hit him. She had already made it clear she was moving on. She didn't need him anymore. "No," Jack said, his voice steady but with a hint of hesitation. "Send her in." A few minutes later, Emily walked into the room, her presence as calm and composed as ever. Jack stood up, his eyes locking onto hers. For a moment, it felt as if nothing had changed. The world outside ceased to exist, but the silence between them was deafening. "Jack," Emily said, her voice cool but not unkind, "I just wanted to make sure you knew that I'm fine. I've moved on. You don't need to worry about me." Jack couldn't find the words at first. He just stared at her, unsure of what to say. She was standing there, so strong and beautiful, but there was an undeniable distance between them now. The connection that once was so effortless had become a strained memory. "I know," Jack finally said, his voice quiet. "I'm sorry for everything. I never meant to hurt you." Emily took a deep breath, her gaze softening for a moment. "You didn't, Jack. I just couldn't keep waiting for someone who wasn't ready to give me what I needed." Jack felt a sharp pang in his chest. The truth of her words cut through him. He had waited too long to change, and now there was nothing left to save. He had missed his chance. "I've always known that I'm not enough for you, Emily," Jack admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "I was so consumed with my work, so obsessed with building my empire, that I pushed you aside. I thought I could have everything, but in the end, I lost the only thing that really mattered." Emily looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "I think you knew that all along, Jack. You just never wanted to admit it." Jack's shoulders slumped, the weight of his realization crashing over him. He had spent his life chasing after success, but in doing so, he had lost the one thing that could have made him truly happy. As Emily turned to leave, Jack stood up abruptly, his voice shaking. "Emily, please don't go." She paused but didn't turn around. "What do you want from me, Jack? We can't go back. We can't undo what's been done. I just want to make it right," Jack said, his voice breaking. "I don't want to live with this regret. I don't want to live without you." Emily turned to face him, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and acceptance. You can't just change everything because you're afraid of being alone, Jack. That's not love. That's guilt. You can't force someone to love you again, no matter how much you want it. Her words stung like a sharp knife, but Jack knew she was right. He had pushed her away for so long that now there was no way to fix it. No amount of apologies, no grand gestures could undo the hurt he had caused. I know, he whispered. I've lost you, Emily, and I deserve to lose everything. Emily looked at him one last time, her expression soft but resolute. I hope you find what you're looking for, Jack, but I'm not a part of it anymore. With that, Emily turned and walked out of his office, leaving Jack standing there, alone once again. Days turned into weeks, and Jack's world seemed to continue crumbling around him. Despite his success, despite the empire he had built, he could not escape the void that Emily had left behind. He tried to focus on work, to throw himself into his business as he always had, but it felt hollow. He began to see the world differently. Money, success, and power meant nothing without love. He had built his empire, but at what cost? He had sacrificed his happiness, his future, for a legacy that no longer held any meaning. Jack tried reaching out to Emily one last time, sending messages, letters, but she never responded. It was clear that she had moved on, and no matter how much he regretted his choices, he could not undo the past. Years passed, and Jack's company continued to thrive. He had achieved more than he ever thought possible. But the one thing he had wanted most in life, Emily, was forever out of reach. Jack sat alone in his penthouse one evening, staring at the city below, just as he had done so many times before. But this time, he wasn't looking at the skyline with ambition. He was looking at it with resignation. He had everything, yet he had nothing. He thought back to the days when Emily had been a part of his life, when they had shared dreams, laughter, and love. Now, those memories felt like a lifetime ago, lost in the distance. Days turned into months, and Jack found himself trapped in a cycle he couldn't break. Every success, every deal he closed, seemed to fall flat. He went through the motions, his life a series of meetings, calls, and business decisions, but none of it felt fulfilling. The penthouse he once admired, with its grand windows and panoramic views of the city, felt suffocating. The walls that had once seemed like a sanctuary now felt like a cage, enclosing him in a life that no longer held meaning. The laughter and warmth that used to fill his home were now replaced with silence. Jack had everything that most people could ever dream of: money, power, a legacy that few could rival. Yet he felt emptier than ever. Emily was gone, and no matter how many deals he struck or how many new projects he launched, he couldn't fill the hole she had left in his heart. One morning, Jack's father, Thomas Carter, called. The call was brief, but filled with unspoken expectations. Jack, his father's voice crackled through the phone. I've been hearing things. We need to talk about the future of the company. I don't think you're putting enough effort into it. Jack clenched his jaw. He had been hearing the same thing from his father for years. Thomas Carter, a man who had built an empire from the ground up, had always expected Jack to take the reins of Carter Enterprises and continue the family legacy. But now, Jack wasn't sure if that was what he wanted anymore. I'm doing the best I can, Dad, Jack said, trying to keep his voice steady. But I've been thinking. I'm not sure the company is all I want anymore. His father's voice stiffened. What are you talking about? You've spent your entire life building this company. You can't just walk away from it now. Jack paused for a moment, trying to find the words. I'm not walking away, but I can't keep living for the legacy. I've made my own choices, and I'm trying to figure out what I really want. His father's silence on the other end of the line was deafening. After what felt like an eternity, his father spoke again, his voice hard. You'll regret this, Jack. You'll regret not stepping up when the time came. Don't come back to me when you've lost everything. Jack hung up the phone, feeling the weight of his father's words. His relationship with his family had always been defined by duty to uphold the Carter name, to expand their wealth, to be the perfect heir. But now, Jack wasn't sure he could live up to those expectations anymore. As much as Jack tried to focus on his work, his thoughts kept drifting back to Emily. He had tried to bury his feelings, to pretend that he could move on from her, but it was impossible. He would walk through his office and catch glimpses of her in the corners of his mind, her smile, her laughter. The way she would look at him when they shared quiet moments. It wasn't just the memories of their time together that haunted him. It was the realization that he had failed her. He had never prioritized her, never fought for their love the way he should have. And now he was paying the price. Jack spent his nights going over the details of their last conversation. He had apologized, yes, but the words were hollow. He had failed to see how deep her pain ran. He had failed to understand that Emily wasn't just asking for his time. She was asking for his heart. One evening, Jack walked into a museum exhibition on the outskirts of the city. He had heard about it through the grapevine and decided to visit, hoping the art would give him some sense of escape. The museum was quiet, the air filled with the soft hum of voices from other visitors. As he wandered through the exhibits, he was suddenly drawn to a familiar figure standing in front of a painting. His heart skipped a beat when he saw Emily. She stood there, her back to him, completely absorbed in the artwork. Her beauty had only grown in the time they'd been apart. But it wasn't her appearance that caught Jack's attention, it was the calm, contented way she stood, lost in her own world. For a moment, he thought about walking away, pretending he hadn't seen her. But his feet moved of their own accord, and before he could stop himself, he found himself standing beside her. Emily, Jack said softly, his voice barely a whisper. She turned to face him, her expression neutral, but Jack could see the glimmer of surprise in her eyes. She hadn't expected him to show up. Not after everything that had happened between them. Jack, she said, her voice steady but distant. What are you doing here? Jack started, then stopped himself. I just needed to see you, too. Apologize again, for everything. Emily's gaze softened for a moment, but she quickly masked it with a quiet resolve. You don't need to apologize, Jack. What happened between us is in the past. I've moved on. The words hit Jack like a blow to the chest. He had known this, of course, but hearing it from her mouth made it real. She had moved on, and he was left with nothing but regret and longing. I'm sorry, Jack said again, his voice thick with emotion. I should have chosen you. I should have been there for you, but I didn't. And now I have to live with that. Emily looked at him for a long moment, then slowly nodded. I've lived with it too, Jack. But I've learned that some things aren't meant to be fixed. Some things are just ... done. Jack swallowed, the reality of it all crashing down on him. You've really moved on, haven't you? I have, Emily said, her voice calm but firm. And I hope you do too, Jack. It's the only way for both of us to move forward. Jack stood there for a moment, watching as Emily turned and walked away. The sound of her footsteps echoed in his mind as she disappeared into the gallery, her figure fading from view. It felt like a final goodbye, a closure that Jack hadn't been ready for, but he had no choice now. Emily was gone, and no matter how much he regretted his decisions, no matter how much he longed for her, he couldn't turn back time. He had let the love of his life slip through his fingers, all because he had chosen a path that didn't lead to her. Jack walked out of the museum, the cool night air biting at his skin. He had everything, but now he realized that it meant nothing. The empire he had built, the success he had achieved, all of it felt empty without Emily by his side. The city stretched out before him, vast and empty, just like his heart. Days blurred together for Jack. He couldn't escape the image of Emily walking away from him at the museum, her steps echoing in his mind long after she had disappeared from his view. Every moment without her felt heavier than the last. His apartment, which had once felt like a sanctuary, now felt like a prison. The walls seemed to close in on him, and the silence was suffocating. He had tried to focus on his business, pushing through meetings, finalizing deals, and attending high-profile events, but nothing seemed to matter. Every victory, every congratulatory message, every business deal was overshadowed by the gnawing emptiness that lingered in his. Jack had everything the world could offer: wealth, power, influence, but none of it could replace Emily. And now he was left alone, surrounded by success, but yearning for something he could never get back. The love of his life was gone, and all the things he had worked for suddenly seemed meaningless. One sleepless night, Jack found himself standing by the window in his penthouse, staring out at the city below. The lights twinkled like a million possibilities, yet he felt like he was trapped in the dark, unable to move forward. He had spent so many years trying to live up to his father's legacy, trying to prove himself worthy of the empire he had inherited. But now, looking out over the city, he realized that none of it had ever truly made him happy. What good was all the power and success if you didn't have someone to share it with? His thoughts drifted back to Emily, her smile, her laughter, the way she had held him in the quiet moments, showing him a life that wasn't just about business and legacy. She had been everything he needed, but he had been too blind to see it until it was too late. "I never should have let you go," Jack muttered to himself, his voice barely audible over the hum of the city. He wanted to reach out to her, to beg her to take him back, but he knew it was pointless. He had lost her, and now he had to live with that regret. The next day, Jack made a decision. He couldn't go on like this. He needed closure, and he needed to hear Emily's voice one more time. If there was any part of her that could forgive him, he had to try. He dialed her number. His hands trembled as he waited for the line to connect. The phone rang once, twice, and then, "Hello." Emily's voice came through the receiver, as calm and composed as always. "Emily," Jack's voice was hoarse, filled with the weight of his emotions. "It's me, Jack. I know it's been a while, but I just need to talk to you." There was a long pause on the other end, and Jack could hear her breathing softly. He could sense the hesitation in her, but she didn't hang up. That was a small victory. "What do you want, Jack?" Emily's voice was guarded, but not unkind. "I just... I need to say I'm sorry. I know I hurt you, and I know I failed you. I wasn't there when you needed me, and I chose work over us. I've regretted it every single day. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need you to know how much you mean to me, how much I still care for you." There was silence for a long moment. Jack's heart raced as he waited for her response. Finally, Emily spoke, her voice soft but firm. "Jack, you made your choices, and I made mine. I can't keep going back to the past, and I don't think we can fix what's been broken." "I understand," Jack said quietly, the weight of her words sinking deep into him. "But I just needed you to know that I never stopped caring. That I love you, Emily. I always have." "I know, Jack," Emily replied, her voice trembling slightly. "But love isn't enough. It never was. I needed more than promises. I needed someone who would choose me first. And I'm sorry, but I can't keep waiting for something that isn't coming." Jack closed his eyes, the finality of her words settling in. "I understand. I'm sorry for everything." Before he could say another word, Emily ended the call. The sound of the phone clicking off echoed in the silence of the room, a sharp reminder of the finality of their partying. Jack sat in his office chair for a long time after the call, his mind reeling from the conversation. Emily had made it clear that there was no turning back, that their relationship was gone, and while part of him wanted to keep fighting, to find some way to fix things, he knew deep down that it was over. He had lost her in the following days. Jack tried to focus on his business, on building his empire, but the weight of his own regret crushed him. Emily had been the one person who made him feel alive, who gave him purpose outside of work. And now he was back to living in the empty world he had built alone. His thoughts turned to his father's legacy. He had spent so much time trying to live up to his father's expectations, trying to prove he was worthy of carrying on the family name. But now, he couldn't help but wonder if his father's legacy was worth anything if he had lost everything that truly mattered. Jack stood in front of the window again, watching the lights of the city flicker below. He had everything the world could offer, yet his heart felt empty. He had given up everything for success, and now he was left with nothing but the cold reality that he had lost the love of his life. Days passed, and Jack found himself caught in a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions that he couldn't seem to escape. The city around him continued its relentless pace, but he felt like an outsider, watching the world go by from a distance. He had everything: power, wealth, and influence, but none of it mattered. What good was a city full of lights when his world felt dark and empty? The success of Carter Enterprises had continued to grow despite his personal struggles, but Jack couldn't find the joy in it anymore. Every deal he closed, every new project he launched, only reminded him of the love he had lost. The future he had imagined for himself, one of legacy, family, and unshakable success, now seemed hollow without Emily by his side. He hadn't heard from her since their last conversation. She had made it clear that she was done with him, and Jack knew deep down that nothing he did would change that. But the pain of losing her was something he couldn't shake. He had missed his chance, and now he was paying the price. One evening, Jack found himself walking through the familiar streets of the city, his thoughts consumed with memories of Emily. He passed by the restaurant where they had celebrated their first anniversary, the park where they had spent hours talking and laughing, the street corner where they had shared their first kiss. Each place felt like a different life, one where he had a future with Emily, but now they were just reminders of what he had lost. The weight of his choices pressed on him, suffocating him with each step. Without thinking, Jack found himself standing outside Emily's apartment building. The lights were on in her window, and for a brief moment, He wondered if she was there. Would she welcome him back? Would she allow him the chance to apologize once more? He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, staring at it for a moment. The urge to call her, to beg for one more chance, was overwhelming. But then the thought hit him. Even if he could apologize, even if he could explain himself, would she believe him? Would she take him back? No, he had made his choice, and now Emily had moved on. He had no right to interfere in her life again. With a heavy heart, Jack turned away and walked back down the street, the haunting memory of the life they had once shared lingering in his mind. The next morning, Jack received a call from Thomas Carter, his father. The old man's voice was stern as usual, but there was a certain edge to it today. "Jack," his father said, "it's time to talk about the future of the company. We need to discuss the direction we're going in. You can't just keep running away from your responsibilities." Jack sighed, already feeling the pressure building. His father's words were always heavy, always filled with expectations. But now they felt like an imposition. Jack was tired of playing the part his family had designed for him. "I'm doing things differently now, Dad," Jack said, trying to keep his tone steady. "I've been focusing on the company, but I'm also trying to find my own way. I'm not just a businessman. I'm a person, too." His father's response was cold. "You're playing a dangerous game, Jack. The company needs you. We've built this legacy together, and you can't just throw it away for personal whims." Jack felt his patience wearing thin. "It's not a whim. It's my life, and I'm not going to live it based on your expectations anymore." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then Thomas spoke again, his voice colder than before. "If you continue down this path, you will have to choose. You'll lose everything, and when you do, don't come back to me for help." The words cut through Jack like a knife. His father had always been a man of few words, but when he spoke, it was with authority. Jack knew the ultimatum was real. The choice had always been there: family or love, legacy or freedom. But now he understood just how deep the divide had become. Jack hung up the phone, his hands trembling slightly. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was standing on the edge of something he couldn't control. The company, the legacy, the world his father had built it, was all crumbling, and Jack was the one holding the pieces together, but at what cost? He glanced at the framed photo on his desk, the one of him and Emily, taken at their favorite beach vacation. They had been so happy then, so carefree, but now it felt like a distant dream, something he could never have again. As the hours passed, Jack sat at his desk, going through paperwork, attending conference calls, and making decisions that would shape the future of the company. But none of it felt real anymore. He had built this empire, yes, but it was built on the ashes of everything he had given up the time with Emily. The love he had taken for granted, the life he had thought was inevitable. Jack couldn't help but feel the irony of it all. He had spent years chasing after something he thought would fulfill him, but now he realized it had only left him with a sense of emptiness. Late in the evening, after another long day filled with business meetings and fleeting conversations, Jack decided he needed to see Emily. He had no idea what he would say to her, but he knew he couldn't keep living in the past without at least trying to understand what went wrong. He needed to know if there was any chance left at redemption. Jack drove to Emily's new apartment, unsure of what to expect. The city streets were quiet, bathed in the glow of the streetlights. When he arrived, he stood in front of her building for several minutes, staring at the entrance. He had imagined this moment countless times, but now that it was here, he wasn't sure if he was ready to face it. After what felt like an eternity, Jack finally pushed the door open and stepped inside. He walked to the elevator, feeling a mixture of hope and dread. When he reached Emily's floor, his heart began to race. He walked down the hall, stopping in front of her door. He knocked softly, his hand trembling slightly. He wasn't sure if she would even answer, but he had to try. Seconds later, the door opened, and there she was, Emily. She looked at him, surprise flickering in her eyes, before she quickly masked it with a neutral expression. "Jack," she said, her voice calm but guarded. "What are you doing here? I need to talk to you," Jack said, his voice shaky. "Please, just a few minutes." Emily hesitated, then stepped aside, letting him in. But the space between them felt as vast as ever, and Jack realized just how far they had drifted. Jack sat in Emily's apartment, a place that used to hold so much promise for their future together. But now, everything felt foreign. The warmth of their old relationship had vanished, replaced by the chilling reality of what they had become to people who once meant everything to each other. Now standing on opposite sides of the world, he had apologized countless times, but the pain in her eyes still haunted him. Emily had been his world once, but he had been blind to it. Now, sitting across from her in silence, he could feel the distance between them thick, palpable and insurmountable. Emily, on the other hand, had built a new life without him. The apartment was decorated with her personal touch, filled with her art and books, a clear symbol of the life she had claimed for herself. She had moved on, found peace, while Jack remained trapped in the past, unable to escape the regret that gnawed at him. "Emily," Jack began, his voice breaking the heavy silence. "I don't know what to say anymore. I've apologized. I've tried to make amends, but nothing seems enough. I was a fool to let you go." Emily looked at him, her expression soft but unreadable. "Jack, you weren't just a fool," she said quietly. "You were lost. Lost in your own world, too consumed by the idea of success to see the person who loved you standing right in front of you." Jack swallowed hard, his throat tightening as he struggled to find the right words. "I thought I could fix it all. I thought that if I succeeded, if I built something great, everything else would fall into place. But I was wrong. I lost the most important thing in my life." Emily's eyes glistened with unshed tears, but she quickly wiped them away, determined to remain composed. "It's not just about losing me, Jack. It's about you losing yourself. You never saw me for who I truly was. You saw me as a part of your life, something that could be put on hold, while you chased after things that would never give you what you wanted." Jack felt his heart breaking as she spoke. He had always thought he could make things right, but now he realized that there was no going back. They had both changed. The love they had once shared had been irrevocably altered, perhaps even destroyed, by his inability to prioritize it. "I know now, Emily," Jack whispered. "I see it now. I see that love isn't something you can put on hold. It's not something you can chase after everything else is in place. It's something you have to choose, and I failed to choose you." Emily stood up and walked toward the window, looking out over the city. The soft glow of the streetlights cast a golden hue on her face. She was a woman who had found peace, found herself, and Jack couldn't help but feel the depth of her strength. She turned back to face him, a small, bittersweet smile playing on her lips. "I've moved on, Jack. I've spent so much time trying to fix something that wasn't meant to be fixed. I've learned to love myself, to live my life the way I always dreamed, and I can't go back to the person I was when I was with you." Jack stood up slowly, his legs feeling heavy as he approached her. He reached out to her, but she stepped back, her expression soft yet firm. "I'm sorry," Jack said again, his voice filled with desperation. "But I need you to understand. They can't keep living like this. I can't keep living in this empty space, wondering what could have been. I need you to know that I never stopped loving you." Emily shook her head gently. "You can't live in the past, Jack, and neither can I. I loved you once, but love isn't a promise. It's a choice. And you didn't choose me." Jack's chest tightened as the finality of her words hit him like a blow. He had been holding on to the past, hoping for something to change. But Emily had already let go. "I wish I could have been the man you needed me to be," Jack said, his voice raw. "But I wasn't, and I don't expect you to forgive me. I needed you to know that I was wrong." Emily took a deep breath and walked toward the door. She paused before turning back to look at him one last time. "Goodbye, Jack," she said, her voice soft but resolute. "I hope you find the peace you're looking for." Jack watched as Emily walked out the door, the click of the lock echoing in his mind. The apartment was eerily silent. He stood there, frozen, his mind struggling to process the finality of it all. The reality had set in. Emily was gone, and there was nothing he could do to bring her back. The love of his life had walked out of his world, and Jack was left with nothing but the remnants of his mistakes. He slowly sank down onto the couch, his head in his hands. The weight of everything he had lost, the time with Emily, the future they could have had. The love he had taken for granted was suffocating. Jack had spent years building an empire, chasing success, thinking that if he had everything, he would finally be happy. But now, with everything in front of him, he realized it was all meaningless. The money, the power, the accolades, it was all just a facade, a distraction from the emptiness that lay at the core of his heart. Sitting in the dimly lit apartment, Jack realized that no amount of success could fill the void he felt. He had sacrificed everything for his career, for the legacy of his family, and in doing so, he had lost the one thing that could have made him truly happy. Love. Emily had been right all along. Love wasn't a part of the equation. Love wasn't something you could chase after once you had everything else in place. It was something you needed to choose first, and Jack had failed to do that. As Jack sat alone in his apartment, the reality of his life settled in. He had everything, but he was still empty. The one person who had given him a sense of purpose had walked away, and now there was no way to go back. The future he had worked so hard for no longer seemed like something worth fighting for. The regrets, the mistakes, they were too much to bear. Jack was alone, and he knew, deep down, that he would never be able to undo the damage. His life, his empire, his legacy, they all meant nothing now, without the one person he had let slip through his fingers, and with that, Jack Carter was left to live with the consequences of his choices, in a world where love was no longer part of the equation. Jack sat alone in the darkened office, the cold glow of his laptop screen the only source of light. It had been weeks since Emily walked out of his life, and each day felt like an eternity. He couldn't escape the quiet in his apartment, the space once filled with laughter, love, and hope, now consumed by emptiness. No amount of work, no meeting, no accomplishment could fill the void she had left behind. The empire he had spent years building was more than just a company, it was a representation of his entire life, his worth and his father's expectations. But now, as Jack stared at the numbers on his screen, he saw it for what it really was, an empty shell. He had everything that many would envy, but he felt like a stranger in his own life. The riches, the power, the success, they were all just distractions from the reality that he was lost without Emily. She had been his heart, and now it felt like it had been ripped out. One night, Jack couldn't take it anymore. The walls of his penthouse felt like they were closing in on him, and the silence was deafening. He needed to escape, to find something that would give him peace, or at least distract him from the overwhelming guilt and loneliness. He walked out into the night, unsure of where he was going. His feet carried him through the familiar streets of the city, the ones he had walked down countless times with Emily, the park where they had once spent hours talking, the cafe where they had their first date. Each place was a painful reminder of what he had lost. It wasn't long before he found himself at the same cafe where he had met Emily that fateful evening. The lights inside were soft and warm, a stark contrast to the cold emptiness inside him. He stood outside for a moment, staring through the window, and then something strange happened. He saw her. Emily. She was sitting by the window, sipping her coffee, completely unaware that Jack was standing there. She looked just as beautiful as the day he had last seen her, her eyes focused on the book in front of her. For a moment, Jack was paralyzed, unsure of what to do. He wanted to approach her, to say something, anything, to make her understand how much he regretted everything. But he knew that it would only hurt her more. He turned away, retreating into the shadows, feeling the weight of his regret heavier than ever before. Days passed, and Jack struggled to find a way forward. His company was thriving, but it felt like he was merely going through the motions. The success didn't matter anymore. He was still alone, and no matter how many meetings he had or projects he launched, nothing could replace the life he had lost with Emily. He knew that if he wanted to move on, he had to accept the truth. He had made his choices, and he couldn't undo them. He had chosen work over love, legacy over happiness, and now he had to live with the consequences. Jack reached out to his assistant and requested a meeting with his top investors. He knew he needed to focus on his business and secure its future, but this time there was no passion in his decisions, no drive to prove anything. It was all mechanical, a task he had to complete to keep up appearances. His thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. It was David, his longtime assistant and friend. David had been by his side since the early days of the company, and he could see the toll that the loss of Emily had taken on Jack. "Jack," David began, his voice soft but concerned, "you can't keep doing this. You're pushing everyone away, including yourself. You can't keep running from the past. You have to face it." Jack looked up, his eyes dark and tired. "I don't know how to fix it. David, I lost the one thing that mattered most to me." David sat down across from Jack, his expression filled with empathy. "I'm not going to pretend like it's easy, but you've got to forgive yourself. And you've got to let Emily go. She's not coming back, and no matter how much you want to fix it, you can't change what happened. You can only move forward." Jack sighed deeply. "I know, but I don't know how to. I've built everything I thought I wanted, but now that I have it, it means nothing. I thought success would make me happy, but it hasn't. I can't change the past, and now I have to live with the consequences." As the days passed, Jack's perspective began to shift. He realized that while he couldn't undo the past, he could still choose to live differently moving forward. The pain and the regret would always be with him, but he didn't have to let it define him. He took a long walk to the park where he and Emily had shared so many happy moments. He stood there, looking at the place where they had once sat on a bench, talking about their future together. That future was gone now, but Jack could see that he had to find a way to move on. It wasn't easy. Every day was a battle. But Jack understood now that the only way forward was to face the pain, to accept the consequences of his choices, and to let go of the past. He had lost Emily, but he still had the opportunity to build something meaningful, even if it wasn't the life he had imagined. A few weeks later, Jack found himself in a small art gallery, an unlikely place for a man like him. But he had promised himself that he would try to find meaning in things outside of his business. He wandered through the exhibit, observing the art, the brushstrokes, the colors. It was simple, yet it gave him a sense of peace as he walked past a painting. Something caught his eye, picture of two people standing by the sea, holding hands. It was a beautiful piece, one that made him think of Emily, of what they could have had. For the first time in a long time, Jack didn't feel the overwhelming regret that had haunted him for so long. Instead, he felt a strange sense of calm. The world had gone on, and so would he. He would never forget Emily, and he would never stop loving her, but he knew now that he had to live for himself. He couldn't keep holding on to a past that would never be. Jack had to build a new future that would honor the love he had lost, but also allow him to move forward and find peace. It had been months since Jack had seen Emily. Every day, the ache of her absence felt a little less sharp, but the weight of the loss never fully faded. He had tried to move forward with his business, throwing himself into work and trying to find meaning in things other than his legacy. But deep inside, the emptiness still lingered. His company, Carter Enterprises, was thriving. Yet, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that it was all for nothing. He had spent so many years building his empire, and in the end, what had it brought him? Power, money, a name that people admired. None of it mattered anymore. Jack had made peace with the fact that he couldn't undo the past, that Emily had moved on, and that he had missed his chance. But as much as he tried to fill the void with his work, he realized that the only way forward was to accept his mistakes and let go of the person he had once been. The phone rang, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was his assistant. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice businesslike. "There's a letter for you. It's from Emily." Jack's heart skipped a beat. The name he hadn't heard in months. He hadn't expected to hear from her again, not after everything, double quotes please, ... "Send it to me," Jack said, his voice suddenly distant, as he sat in his office. Jack carefully unfolded the letter that had arrived from Emily. His hands trembled as he read her words. It had been so long, and now, reading her handwriting again, he felt a flood of emotions. "I don't know how to begin, or if I even should, but I've thought about you a lot these past few months. I've been living my life, making my own choices, and growing as a person. But in some way, I've always carried the memory of us with me. I don't know what you're going through now, but I know this: I never hated you. I just needed more than what you could give me. I had to choose my own path. But it doesn't mean I don't still care about you, Jack. I know we can't go back to what we were. I've accepted that, and I think you've accepted it too. But I wanted you to know that I don't hold any bitterness. I wish you the best, Jack, and I hope you find peace. Take care of yourself, sincerely. Emily. Jack set the letter down slowly, feeling the weight of her words wash over him. Emily had moved on, and she had forgiven him, even if only in her heart. But what about him? Could he ever forgive himself for the mistakes he had made? For the first time in months, Jack felt a sense of release. The guilt that had weighed so heavily on him started to fade. He would never get Emily back, but the closure she had given him, even if only through a letter, was enough to let him take the next step in his life. He stood up, walking to the window and staring out over the city. The lights flickered below, as if to remind him that the world kept turning, no matter how much regret one person carried. The following weeks were difficult, but transformative. Jack began to let go of the anger and regret that had been eating him alive. He focused on his business, but not with the same obsessive drive. He began to rebuild his life not for anyone else, but for himself. He started taking time off, spending weekends in places he had never visited, reconnecting with old friends, and rediscovering passions outside of work. It was a slow process, but Jack felt himself coming back to life, step by step. One day, he found himself sitting at a cafe, reading a book. It was the first time in a long time that he had truly felt at peace, alone but not lonely. The world was still out there, and so was his future. It was his to create. He knew it would never be the same, that there would always be a part of him that wished for what he had lost. But he also knew that the future wasn't something he could predict. He couldn't control what happened, but he could control how he moved forward. And that was enough. A year passed, and Jack had settled into a rhythm. His business continued to thrive, but more importantly, he had found a balance in life. He had let go of his obsession with success and had learned to enjoy the simple things: a cup of coffee, a quiet evening, a walk through the park. One evening, as he was leaving his office, Jack received an unexpected call. It was from Emily's number. For a moment, he hesitated, unsure whether he was ready to hear her voice again. He answered, "Hello," Jack said, his heart racing. "Hi, Jack." Emily's voice came through softly, yet with a sense of calm. "I've been thinking about you a lot. I know it's been a while, but I wanted to check in, see how you're doing." Jack felt a lump form in his throat. He hadn't expected this, but as he listened to her voice, he realized how much time had passed and how far they both had come. "I'm doing well, Emily," Jack replied. I'm at peace now. I think I finally understand everything." "I'm glad to hear that," Emily said, a quiet sincerity in her voice. "I just wanted to say that I wish you the best." "I always will." Jack closed his eyes, the weight of her words settling in. "Thank you, Emily. You were right about so many things. I'll never forget what we had, and I'll always be grateful for you." There was a brief silence between them before Emily spoke again. "Goodbye." "Jack," she said, her voice gentle. "Goodbye." "Emily," Jack whispered back, knowing that this time, the goodbye was final after that conversation. Jack knew that the past was truly behind him. He had let go of the hope of reconciliation, and in doing so, he had found a strange kind of peace. Jack stood by the window once more, looking out at the city lights. The future was uncertain, but it was his to shape. He had learned that success wasn't measured by the empire you built, but by the life you lived and the people you loved along the way. He wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring, but he knew one thing for certain: he was no longer living in the past. He had taken the lessons of regret and turned them into something better. His journey wasn't over. It had only just begun.